go is for masochists. There's just one problem after another, and there's no hope of ever finding the right answer because there aren't enough atoms in the universe for that. But we still try. So what would you do here? It's white to play. What would you do? What's important? What's going on? Well, about 40 years ago, Bruce Wilcox coined the term sector line, which is an old concept, but Bruce was the first to formalize it into the rationale of a computer program. And a sector line is basically an imaginary line across empty space between stones of the same color in different groups. So there are sector lines all over the place. If I remember correctly, Bruce was especially interested in the places where sector lines of different colors cross, and he saw those crossing points as focal points for development for either side, and worked out some fighting principles based around that. Sector lines between the extremities of groups are defined moyos, and we'll hear Michael talking about White's moyo on the left-hand side in a moment. That moyo would be defined by the stones that I've marked here. It's just occurred to me that it takes me about 50 times as long to make a movie about just one move as it did Michael to make his movie about the whole game. Maybe that's the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Mind you, Michael is more or less reading from a prepared script, which I expect took him quite a long time to put together, because the analysis he makes is very in-depth. At the moment, Swim doesn't look at Bruce's sector line crossing points, but she does look at sector lines as possible escape paths for weak groups, and she does look at moyos. When thinking about expanding her own moyos, or reducing or invading those of the opponent, Swim doesn't look at sector lines, but at what I call green lines, which are imaginary lines across empty space that connect stones of different colors. Green lines are paths along which moyo extensions can be made, and they also form the boundaries of escape routes for invading enemy stones, as described in Joye's new move.
Black's biggest ice space is the one in the bottom right. In this situation, there is just one green path between Black's bottom right group and my own groups. Here is the living room inside Black's ice space. It is bigger than 7x3, so there is enough room for me to live. There are 2 points in the intersection of my escape route and living room. Sometimes it is good to probe on the second line, but in general, I prefer to invade on the 3 line.
Well,
in this example, the green line shown is a direction along which white can expand his moyo, delimited by the stones marked M. So now the question that arises is, how far along the green line, along a green line, should white extend? Well, that's going to depend. Go proverbs are a useful source of heuristics, and there is a go proverb about extending on the third line, jumping 3 spaces from a 2-stone wall, or the conservative double jump from a single stone on the third line. But when it comes to extending moyos, I'm not aware of any proverbs. However, there is one heuristic we can use, and that is the size of the smallest living group in the middle. If you jump further than that, there's a possibility that the opponent could jump in behind you and live inside your moyo, which isn't exactly the point of trying to expand it, unless you're deliberately wishing to invite an invasion so you can attack it for some other purpose. Well, so in this simple case of not going too far is, as I said, further than the size of the smallest living space the opponent would need. And that's where the magic number 7 comes in, because a space of 7 by 5 is the smallest living group anyone can make in the center, or 7 by 3 on the side. So, well, if we look 7 spaces along that green line, this is what we get.
I would probably take in a ladder and add a stone somewhere. AlphaGo likes to do it this way now. So like professionals long ago would just capture the 1 black stone with a move here.
Yeah.
And then after Go-Seigen, people started playing moves in the vicinity of this area to do something a bit more efficient for white. Instead of capturing the stone, playing a stone around somewhere close to the center. But AlphaGo goes all the way to what I'm calling a double knight's move. It's like white has played the second knight's move from this stone. And so this is where AlphaGo likes to play when it captures that ladder. And I guess the idea is that anything inside that is going to be a black stone that gets attacked. And so white's building a big moyo.
Wow.
So actually in the self-played games, we've already seen something like this happen. It's a kind of a pattern that AlphaGo has.
They seem, I mean, so, I don't want to say unidirectional, but I mean, they're so obvious that they're staking out, you know,
Well, it's a much more aggressive way for white to play, to expand the moyo like that. And it is difficult for black to jump in.
Okay.
Well, so AlphaGo isn't using anything like Swim's 7-step green line heuristic, but it is coming up with the same kind of move in the same situation. So maybe one day AlphaGo's convolutions can be translated into language that makes sense to people, which Swim does innately because it's based on how I think people who write books about Go think. 7 is a magic number for a couple of other reasons. There's some evidence that it's the approximate size of short-term memory, by which I believe the author means memory that lasts a few milliseconds, not the sort of thing that people commonly think of when they talk about short-term memory and can't remember where they left their glasses and things like that. And it's also the number of days in the week. Well, where does that come from? Well, there's all kinds of theories, but one thing that you can be pretty sure of is that it was invented a long time before the Bible. because the Bible wasn't written until about 500 BC. And people had been measuring the week as 7 days long before that. For sure, in 600 BC in Babylon and in Sumer in 2000 BC, where there was a 7-day festival. The 7th day was the holy day. 500 years before that, they were measuring length in terms of a cubit. Now, where does a cubit come from? This is length, physical length, not the length of the week. But the number 7 turns up in the measurement of the cubit as well as in the number of days in a week. And there's something special about 7, and what's special about 7 is that if you multiply it by 4, you get 28, which is jolly close to 29, which is jolly close to the number of days in a moon cycle.
Egyptian unit of measurement, the cubit.
In modern terms, the cubit was roughly 52.5 centimetres long, and it is subdivided into what was called 7 palms, the palm of your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And on the end we have 4 fingers there. Perfect. And the way this would be used was marking out and measuring your way down the tomb. In fact, you can see the dots there where they've been marking out. See? As they came down.
It corresponds exactly.
Indeed.
And it's so usable. Look
So
at
simple.
that.
What he said is correct. There are 7 palms in a cubit and 4 fingers in a palm. But he said it the wrong way round, because they didn't take a cubit and divide it into 7 palms. Instead, they took 4 fingers. Now, why did they take 4, do you suppose? They took 4 fingers and said, that's 1 hand, or 1 palm. And we'll use 7 of them to make a cubit. So the cubit wasn't divided into 7 hands, 7 palms. 7 palms were assembled to make a cubit. They came up with the measure the other way round. Well, it's obvious why they use 4 fingers. So if you forget your thumb for a moment, you just hold out 4 fingers, that's a convenient width. And presumably the particular fingers they used was the master mathematician or master mason of the day that came up with the idea in the first place. And they decided to use 7 of them to make a cubit. Why 7? Why not 6 or 8? What's special about 7? So the Egyptians counted in 7s and 4s, whereas we count in 10s. We count in 10s because we got the idea from India, but the Egyptians counted in 7s and 4s. And this is very significant. There's something special about 7 and 4. Let's review what we found out so far. We know that the Egyptians, or at least some of them, worshipped the goddess Isis. Isis was the Egyptian goddess of fertility, the mother of the sun. She was a conflation of the earlier goddess Hathor and the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Her face is round like the moon, and she cradles the sun in the horns of Hathor. The moon was the mother goddess in the sky, the ruler of women, the goddess of childbirth. She was the mother of the sun god Horus, his protector, and our protector too. Every day She comes out at night to watch over us after Horus goes to bed at dusk. The Egyptian civilization wasn't the first culture on Earth, and many of its ideas are derived from earlier cultures, going all the way back to the hunter-gatherers of 37,000 years ago. Back in those days, people would have noticed that menstruation stops when pregnancy starts. They probably realized that men were somehow involved in the production of children, because usually a child looks like its mother's husband. But it wasn't until DNA sequencing was possible that we learned that, on average, 1 in 5 of us is not the child of the man we think is our father. So, if you're sitting in a room with 4 other people, you can look around and see which one of you is his. The hunter-gatherers of 37,000 years ago could see animals having sex and probably figured out the connection between sex and pregnancy and childbirth. But, and this is a key point, not every sex act produces a child, and not every marriage is blessed with children. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors were, like we all are, born with the ability to use their brains to figure things out. So they scratched their heads to figure out where babies come from, and to solve the puzzle of why one woman could produce a child, but not another. It was mysterious, magical, mystical. I think by now you can see where this is going. Modern humans, the species we call modern humans, began 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago, our ancestors had brains as big as ours. That's why we call them modern humans. The modern humans of 200,000 years ago were every bit as smart as we are today. They didn't know as much about the world as we do now, because what we know today is the sum total of everything people have learned and discovered over the whole course of that 200,000 years. Of course, not everyone today knows everything that anyone knows, nor even everything that all ancient people knew collectively. No one can possibly know everything. We only go to school for 10 or maybe 20 years, and that's not long enough to learn everything there is to be learned. There's an old joke about university graduates. When you get a bachelor's degree, you graduate knowing virtually nothing about anything, because 3 or 4 years study is only enough to barely scratch the surface. And after you get a PhD, you know everything about nothing. Because in the 3 years it takes to get a PhD, you only have time to study one tiny little thing, so small that compared to everything else there is to know, it's just about invisible. Your doctor hopefully knows a lot more than you do about medicine, but he or she cannot possibly know everything a doctor needs to know. That's why we have family doctor GPs who know a little about a lot of things, and medical specialists who know a lot about just one thing. Luckily for us all, the inventions of the printing press and movies and the World Wide Web, the collective knowledge of mankind is all written down somewhere. You just have to go out and look for it. School teachers know some things, and Google can find out a lot too. Some of the stuff on the web and some of the stuff in teachers' heads is just plain wrong, or even worse, deceitful tricks like advertising and propaganda that try to take advantage of you. Oh, but that's another whole story that I'll have to leave for the moment because I can't say everything at once. So let's go back 37,000 years ago and put ourselves in the shoes and in the minds of the people that were living in those times. Let's pretend that we know what they knew and can see what they saw. They, or we, can see that sometimes a woman would become pregnant and sometimes she wouldn't. How could this happen? You can see that when a woman becomes pregnant, her menstrual cycle stops and she doesn't get her usual monthly menstruation periods. After a while, she becomes as fat and pregnant as the Venus of Holy Fells. And later a baby comes out from between her legs. A baby, like you once were. What made that happen? 37,000 years ago, there weren't any books or family doctors you could ask. You had to figure it out for yourself.
Holy cow! Holy cow! Holy cow!